Pack on here. It's going to work for a little while, but if somebody could retrieve a couple of batteries for me, that would be fantastic. Because I didn't think to check it before I started. Um, we're going to be in the book of Hebrews for the foreseeable future. It's an incredibly long book, and it's an incredibly intricate book for reasons that we maybe don't understand. The individual who spoke this sermon, now I need fingernails here, hold on. You got fingernails? Pop those out. Try this one more time. Okay. And the main idea behind what we're seeing in the book of Hebrews is a group of Christians who are very heavily persecuted, but not the kind of persecution that we think of when we think of persecution, or we feel like we're persecuted, or we think that, somebody's looking down towards us, or whatever you want to call it, because we follow Jesus and we try to do what's right by the book, and we try to do the right thing in the eyes of God. Not that kind of persecution. We're talking about persecution because they've left the Jewish religion and moved to Christianity. They followed the Messiah into finding what God truly desired for humanity. So there's this idea that we find in the book of rejection. Not just rejection from the people in all of the world, but mainly people that they had grown up and around, right? So, and I think this is a common human problem that we don't often address, and maybe some of us, this is more true than others, but sometimes we allow fear of rejection to determine our direction, right? Sometimes we allow what we think somebody's going to do in response to something we did to determine the direction or the way in which we move toward or away from something else. We allow somebody's influence, somebody's judgment, somebody's idea, somebody's thought process, somebody else's opinion guide our direction, right? Even though when we know it's the right thing to do, and sometimes it turns into this people-pleasing thing, right? Where it's like, well, I gotta do this so that I don't feel rejected, because the natural human response is, I want to be accepted. Well, I want to feel love. I want somebody to accept me for who I am and where I am and what I am. Not because I'm necessarily deserving of it, because I'm a human being that has problems and sins just like everybody else in the world. And I don't want to, you find this, like, if you remember, back to your high school years, the idea of peer pressure, right? Why'd you do some of the things that you did? Why'd you act some of the ways that you acted? Why were you involved in some of the things that you were involved in? And in reality, what it is you felt like, if I don't do this, I'm going to be rejected rather than accepted. And so you submit to this idea, or maybe there's a curiosity with you about this certain thing, and you drifted toward that idea when you knew it was the wrong thing to do, and you did it anyways because you wanted to be accepted. Everybody wants to be accepted for who they are and what they are and where they are. Nobody wants to come into a body of people and be changed. Nobody wants to come into a group and say, well, you have to be this way or you're not allowed here. And so there's this overwhelming feeling of fear of rejection. Well, if I'm not this way, or I don't do this thing, then somebody is not going to receive me for who I truly am. But I really think the more important thing that we need to pay attention to is that it's not about whether or not somebody accepts you. I mean, we have this problem even within the church, people not accepting other people because they're different than other people. I mean, and it's all over the world. It's in politics, it's in your workplaces, your work relationships. It's in your family relationships. Somebody's different, somebody does this differently. Oh, we don't like that person because they're this way. And so there's this, sometimes this fear of rejection that causes me to do things I know are in the opposite direction of the way that I'm trying to live for God. And I think the thing that we need to acknowledge is quite simple and quite important. We cannot allow human rejection, right? Human rejection, other people. We cannot allow human rejection to determine our direction. Human rejection should never, ever, ever determine our direction. This is the problem that essentially we're dealing with the Hebrews. This is a body of people who are in the heart of Jerusalem. This is a group of people who've separated themselves from the larger, more influential Jewish nation. They've followed Jesus. They've been baptized into Christ. They're doing the right things. They're following the way. Yet the persecution is so strong, they're wondering why they're even staying in Christianity to begin with. Now, here's another interesting point. This is not Nero persecution, which happens after 65 AD. This is the heart of Jewish persecution, right? This is not Roman government, large body persecution of Christians. This is Jewish nation persecution, which happened between, 62 and 65 AD, right? It's right about the time this book was written. And it's not really even a book. It's what is called a homily, a written out sermon. Somebody heard this sermon somewhere, put this sermon together because the people in the Hebrews, the Jewish people need to hear this. They need to understand why Jesus is superior to all of the other things they thought were the most important things, right? And they had allowed this idea of human rejection to determine the direction without considering their destination, because your direction determines your destination. The way that you go will determine your destination. I heard it illustrated really cool one time. It's from an airline pilot. I don't know exactly all the details of this, but at their starting point, if they're 1 degree off, they could end up 600 miles from their destination. 1 degree from where they start that plane, and they're 600 miles from where they want to go. And so I do think it's critical, having the right direction, going the right way, following the right individual. Your direction does determine your destination. It does also determine where you end up at the end of this life. Do I go to be with Jesus, or do I go to be away from Jesus? Because where I really want to be, and the reason that I'm really here, and the reason that I'm really following Jesus and trying my best to live the way that He wants me to live, is because ultimately I want to live with Him when my time is up. So I have to walk this path that's difficult and hard and challenging and unaccepted by the world. We all fall into that category to some regard or another. Well, it's like, because we don't want people to see us as, they're sticks in the mud, or they're not normal people. They're just, all they do is quote the Bible. They just throw Bible verses at me all the time. Yeah, they know the scriptures, but I don't really know they can't really have a conversation like a real human being. Right? And so there's this, this idea, right? Where it's like, well, how do I get away from that, right? All right, how do I cause this separation so that I receive acceptance from people? It's like, well, maybe I don't bash people. Well, you shouldn't bash people over the head with the Bible to begin with, right? But here's what the Hebrew writer is going to do in the arguments he's going to make from chapter 1 to chapter 10. And of course, chapters 11 through 13 is his final word of encouragement to the Hebrews to live faithfully and to trust that God will not abandon His people despite persecution. That's 11 through 13. But here's the beginning of the book. Here's where he starts. He starts out with these 4 main points. That Jesus is superior to angels in the Torah, to Moses in the Promised Land, to the priest in Melchizedek, and to the sacrifice and covenants. And he's got 2 main goals in doing this whole thing. And in the way that he structures the book, he has 2 things he wants to draw to the top. Number 1, he wants to elevate Jesus as superior to the angels in the Torah, as superior to the priest in Melchizedek, as superior to the covenants, as superior to the sacrifices, as superior to everything else. This is where Jesus sits. And in chapter 1, he's going to begin elevating those ideas. The second goal he has in mind is he wants to challenge the readers to remain faithful despite persecution. We kind of relate to this in the 21st century. We struggle to hang on to our faith in a world that's filled with secularism. In other words, the idea of separation of the state from religious institution. And what that causes in us and human beings is this compartmentalization that says, well, now I have a box at church, and I have a box at work, and I have a box at family and friends, and I'm going to do this certain thing here, and I'm going to act this certain way here, and then over here I'm going to act differently, I'm going to be this way. And we start to compartmentalize, and we start to separate, and we have these different personalities, which I would agree with. First of all, the separation of church and state is a good thing because you don't want the state running the church and you don't want the church running the state. But we cannot separate life from our faith. Our life is our faith. It is an arrow through the heart of everything we do. It's a direction that we're going in following Jesus, and we cannot separate those things in our life. And I know that a lot of us struggle with that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you've just got it all down. Maybe you don't deal with any of that. But it's a straight arrow line through life. I need to remain faithful despite what people might think of me, despite who might reject me. And I need to do the right thing consistently and constantly. So he begins the book like this. And I imagine as you begin to read this first verse, the Greek is, first of all, this is another level of Greek language. This is not your common Pauline letter for instruction about why they shouldn't do the things they're doing and how, this is not a letter in the sense that I'm giving you instruction to do this thing. This is a message. This is a homily. This is a sermon. And it's poetic. Even the first just few words. I can imagine as a preacher myself, the author standing in a synagogue. The scriptures have been read. And as he begins to teach, he says this: God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets. God, after he spoke. One of the things that the writer assumes about this group of people is that they have a thorough knowledge of the Old Testament. Thorough, through and through. They know all of the tiny little details about the things he's going to talk about. And so this is where he begins. God, after he spoke. They know God spoke. God spoke when he created the world. God spoke when he told Abraham to sacrifice his son. God spoke to men, right? To our ancestors, to our fathers, by it or in the prophets. This is how God began to deal with humanity outside of the garden. It's the picture we don't have because we weren't there. It's the picture we don't have because we're so far removed from the garden we don't understand what it was like for God and man to dwell side by side. And when I see Eden, that's what I see. God spoke. God created. God said. And man and God co-ruled and reigned together in the garden until the day man decided he was going to go his own way. God spoke long ago to the fathers, to our ancestors, to the people that came way and long before us. In the prophets, right? The prophecy is going to show us what that looks like from verse 4 to verse 14 and forward. What this looks like, how God spoke to the fathers in the prophets in many portions or in many parts or in many different sections, right? As we see throughout history, in many portions and in many ways. He spoke to man through donkey, right? He spoke to men in dreams. He spoke to men directly. You remember the incident where Abraham is standing up on the mountain and there's another man with him. Was it just an angel that was conversing with Abraham? God spoke to men in many portions and in many ways. He had various ways that he did things. And so I mean, you can imagine as a first century Jew, well, how do I put my finger on how God speaks to humanity? How do I put my finger on what that looks like? Well, I can't really tell you, because there's so many ways, there's so many portions. But the fact of the matter is, and the thing that he wants us to get across is that it's not the way that he spoke in the past, it's the way he speaks now. In these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. I want you to pay attention to that because I don't think we really grasp what he's really saying here. In these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son. Sound familiar? He has spoken to his followers. He has spoken to his people. He has voiced his message, the gospel, to those of us who are in his Son, in Jesus. He's saying this is a far better way for God to speak. This is the perfect way. This is the superior way. This is the elevated way. Not what you'd put your faith in, not what you'd seen in the past, not what you were wishing for to happen. But what God is doing now is so much better than what he did then. The way that God is speaking now, you need to pay attention. Pay attention. He doesn't live in that place. The veil was torn when Jesus died on the cross. This is what God is doing. This is what God has done, his Son. This is an important phrase too. Because we say son, what we're thinking of and what the Jews would recognize as God's chosen king, right? God's chosen king. Their vision of a king was like, well, a man like David. Well, he was a man after God's own heart. This is God's direct chosen king, created in his image. Look what he says. Whom he appointed heir of all things. He's Lord. Through whom he also made the world. No, this Jesus didn't just come and die on a cross, was buried and resurrected on the third day. No, he was an instrumental part in the creation of the world when God spoke it into existence. Instrumental. This Jesus that you follow, this Jesus that he speaks to us through, had a part. Number one, he's the heir of all things. Number two, he had a fundamental, crucial, creative part in the creation of the world. But then look how he describes him, because we don't want to forget that we're not just talking about a man who God chose to be born at a specific time, die, and resurrected. We want to make sure that we understand that his Son is not just a human, but he's also God. And he is the radiance, the shining, right? Or the glow, right? This idea that, well, I mean, when we look at God, how do we see him? The radiance of his glory, the exact representation. You know what's interesting about this word representation? It's spelled funny, but it's the word character. In the Greek, character is exactly how it sounds and how it's spelled. He is the exact representation of his nature, of God's nature. So when we look at Jesus, what are we seeing? What are we seeing when we try to understand who it is that God? I mean, how do we know what God is like? How do we know what God looks like? How do we know what he's going to do if he's merciful, if he's kind, if he's not just this angry God who's trying to destroy people all the time? How do we know that he's not this way? Well, we look at his Son Jesus. And what did Jesus do? Jesus didn't come with his chest puffed out. He didn't come with an angle or an attitude or a selfish agenda. He came with this idea of how do I save those humans who are overlooked? How do I save those people who can't seem to undo all the damage that they've caused? He's the exact representation of his nature, the radiance of his glory. How we imagine God, how we see God, this is Jesus. He's kind, he's merciful, he's gracious, he's loving. When I want to know what I'm supposed to be like, I have to remember to go back and look at who Jesus was, who Jesus is, where Jesus sits. And this is where he's going to talk about this idea of promise. And he upholds all things by the word of his power, his promises. He upholds all things. Everything that connects and moves and flows together is upheld by the word of his power. And when he had made, listen to this, purification for your sins. This is what he did. He wasn't just, he didn't just die, resurrect, and go back into heaven and be God again. Look what he says. He sat down when he had made purification for sins. When he had died once for all. Not like the sacrifices that are made on the daily or even the yearly to atone for the sins of the people like the Jewish nation. But when he died once for all, when he became that ultimate sacrifice, this is what he did. He sat down. In other words, in ancient language, it means his work was finished. And not only did he just sit down, but he sat down at the right hand of God. Where is Jesus? Where did he go? What did he do when he went up into the clouds? When we last saw him ascend, where did he go? What did he do? He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. He sat down at the right hand of the Father. It's a position of power. Remember back to that story in the Gospel of Mark, where they're having this conversation with and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, come up to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, what we want you to do, whatever we ask of you." And he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they say, "When you come into your glory, may we sit at your right hand and your left." Why? Well, number one, their picture of who and what the king was going to be was completely off course. They thought he was going to be a physical king, put him back into Rome and economic and military power, and he was going to be this figure of the Jewish nation. He was going to conquer all of the Roman world. He was going to overthrow the Romans and restore peace. And they had this image of a king that really wasn't the image of the king that God had painted throughout the scriptures from the beginning of the book of Genesis to Malachi. Well, at least at their point. Their picture was off. They saw one snippet, not the grand scheme. But this God, this Jesus that we follow, that we love, that we seek to serve, is not just an ordinary man who did extraordinary things. He's an extraordinary God who did amazing things. Things that we can't even imagine. Things that he's still doing. And their picture was off somehow. But this God that we serve sits at the right hand of the Majesty on high. And I tell you, I really did. I tried to work in the last, 14 verses here, or the last 10 verses of chapter 1. But there is so much, and it's so deep, and it's so relevant to the world that we live in today, that you just can't cover it all in one sermon. Otherwise, we'd be here 3 hours, and some of you might fall asleep and fall off the pew, okay? But I don't want that to happen. I don't want anybody to get hurt. So he sets the stage with showing how how the way that God speaks to us now is far superior than the way he speaks to us in the past. That's his point. That's what he wants us to get from this. You want to understand God, and then he's going to talk, because he said that God has spoken, and the next part he's going to talk about angels, messengers. Because in the first century, they believed that things like the Torah and the covenant were carried by these messengers, these angelic beings down. And what they're trying to do is tell us that Jesus' message, or where Jesus and how Jesus was far superior, right? God had to before speak through messenger. Now he speaks through the messenger. That's the point he's trying to get across. The thing he's trying to set us up for. So what do we do with this? I mean, we know a lot about the scriptures, right? You know the Bible backwards, forwards, front, back. Maybe I'm assuming too much. I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't know anything at all. Maybe you're wondering why you're sitting here this morning. Maybe you're wondering, well, maybe you're feeling inadequate. I'm telling you right now, as a preacher, I feel inadequate, okay? When I study the scriptures, you go into scriptures, it's like every time you read it, you learn something new, or you get some new insight, or God reveals something to you that He hasn't revealed to you before. And I know all of us are trying to know the scriptures, but we have to have a point in knowing the scriptures, right? This is at least one angle in knowing and understanding the scriptures, right? We should seek to know the scriptures so we can know Jesus. That's just one angle. But why do we want to know Jesus is the other part to that question. So, well, why? Why do we want to know Jesus? Why do we want to know who Jesus is? Why do we want to know what Jesus did? Why do we have to look at His story? Why in the world do we have 4 accounts in the New Testament devoted to His life and what He did? And not only because people, 100 years after Jesus died had questions, or even sooner after that, 15 to 20 years. But it was also for us. You see, if I want to be like Jesus, if I want to understand who Jesus is, I actually have to spend time devoted to learning and studying the Gospels. And I think, maybe this is just my opinion, but maybe it's also something you too should consider, that we need to spend significantly more time studying the character and the teachings of Jesus than we do in the epistles. You see, because, and I'll tell you why I'm arguing this. If we study Jesus, we can become like Jesus. You know what the epistles are for? The epistles are just a translation of the teachings of Jesus. When you look at Paul, that's what he does. He preaches Jesus. He preaches Jesus' teachings to Gentile people, to people who didn't grow up in the Jewish religion, who don't have a clue what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to act, how they're supposed to live. They just know that they found this Jesus and He saved you from your sins, and they're somewhat inclined to try to do the right thing, and they found this body of people and they want to be faithful. But this is what I'm going to challenge you to do. Okay, this week, when you're just trying to decide what you're going to read, what you're going to pray about, who you're going to pray about, who you're going to pray for, who you're going to talk to, call in, check in on, I want you to devote some time to reading a couple of chapters of the gospel accounts. Read the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. See how He interacts with people. See what His demeanor is. Try to imagine sitting at His feet. And this is what I do when I look at the Sermon on the Mount. Imagine I'm sitting in the crowd, listening to these teachings, going, these are to some degree otherworldly. Well, they don't make sense to me. Well, I'm disconnected. But here's the thing. Jesus doesn't approach this with a harsh, I'm going to beat you over the Bible kind of attitude. What He does is He takes practical things in life and He translates them to the spiritual side that maybe we haven't connected to. Right? We should know the Scriptures so we can know Jesus. But that's not the only way we know Jesus. It's not the only way we build a relationship with God. It's not the only way. I mean, there are numerous ways, a handful of ways that we could probably spend an hour talking about. But I won't bore you with that. I'll just let you think about it for the next week. I'll let you digest it. I'll let you read the Gospels and contemplate the way of Jesus, a better way. As is our custom here at the Pleasant View Church of Christ, we offer an invitation every Sunday. There are options for you. We would like to seek to help your needs in any way, whether you're a first-time visitor who has more questions or would like a Bible study, or a long-time member who is struggling with some type of sin in your life, or struggling or having with some type of hardship. This time that we have for the invitation is an opportunity for you to confess your sins if you need to. You can come forward and sit on the front pew. To take the next step in your faith journey. If that is just a simple, I want to know more about who Jesus is and I want to know more about following Jesus, we can help you do that. If it is something where you're further along in that process and you're ready to publicly proclaim your faith to the world, and you're ready to have your sins washed away, then we can help you with that as well. We have a baptistry. If that's the next step in your journey, we can help you do that as we stand and sing.